Gashrin, always here early, always so very polite. Welcome to this week's, what am I calling this now? Game Master Community Roundup. Used to be the OSR Reddit Roundup, and I just thought it would make it a little bit more generic. I just thought we could kind of spread our wings a little bit. And like I mentioned before, I kind of hope eventually to be able to pull in stuff from outside Reddit and not make Reddit the sole source of our talking points. We'll see, little by little. Little by little, we'll get there. Hey, Krister. Welcome aboard. I don't have any other programming notes, so I guess I'll just get to it. Let's see. Let's do some switcheroosies here. Switcher. There we go. Looking at the hot tab of my, what do they call these? This is called a, what do they call? Multi-Reddit, I guess they're called. Basically on Reddit, you can grab a bunch of subreddits. You don't even have to subscribe to them individually, and you can dump them into essentially a feed that you can follow. This one is I put together. I still might tweak it now and then. We'll see. It's a work in progress, but it's called RPG Roundup. Or I always say when I always look at it, I always say RP Groundup. But RPG Roundup. It's also linked in the show notes. You're welcome to use that as a inspiration for your own multi Reddit, or just grab it to follow along. It's a nice way of interfacing with Reddit. I think, especially if, or particularly if maybe you don't want to get super involved, but you just want to follow a bunch of Reddits that might have subreddits that might have interesting stuff. It's a good shortcut to getting a bunch of stuff in front of your eyeballs all at once. I'm on the hot tab, as is usual. What have we got here today? Whoops, stop that. We've got, all right, an ad, no thanks. I have to remember which, the one thing is with this kind of system is everything's just stacked for you. So you have to kind of look to see what your subreddit there is. So I'm not that I'm against looking at world building, let's say subreddit questions or topics like this one, but it's as I'm still figuring out which subreddits work best for this. I'm trying to be cognizant of such things. Like I might take out Unearthed Arcana. I think it's great if you want a lot of items, but I don't know. I don't really care that much about it unless they're really, really interesting or peculiar in some way. And most of I think 99 or 100% of the Unearthed Arcana stuff is basically for 5th edition, and I'm not currently playing 5th edition. Still interested in it. I'm still following it, but I'm not currently playing it, so even less interest for me. This one is a good one. The DM Academy subreddit is a good one for just seeking advice, in this case, offering advice from your fellow dungeon masters. It is, I would suggest, if you're an OSR person, I think that a lot of the stuff you'll read in there, it's good, but it is definitely almost all for 5th edition. So you're going to see some of the advice and some of the things are definitely more modern facing, but I think that some other stuff works, is perfectly applicable to the OSR. And in fact, I've gone in there and I've given advice and stuff from kind of an OSR perspective that I think the people have found to be useful. This one might be interesting. This one's offering advice, but I'm always interested in people's takes. And especially this is something that the topic, which I will say in a second, I think it's a real issue with the modern game. I don't know if it's the game. It's probably no one thing, right? Whether it's the game or the players, anything, the community, I think, player-wise, kind of struggles with that. And that is, the topic is, my players retreated from a battle, and so should yours. Now, in my game, which is kind of an OSR game, old school style game, my players retreat all the time. I mean, but that's something that I've had to, and one, I start off with mostly players who are new, and two, I instilled in them constantly, don't just fight every battle because it's there. You're going to get killed. If you do that, you are most likely going to die. So this one was posted by Z Moby. My players retreated from a battle, and so should yours. In the most recent session, my players explored a keep that had been infested by flame lizards from another dimension. It's a long story. As they were exploring, they came upon the previous throne room infested with flame lizards, seething with heat and smoke. They were 12 feet long and lounging in the hearth and on the ceiling. The players cast Ice Wall and charged into the melee, realizing quickly that the lizards had a fire damage aura. They learned very quickly that the CR was so much higher than anything they could touch at their current level. A hireling was immediately incinerated, and the party ran away to fight another day. It was a terrifically exciting session, but made me realize that the players were smart. They didn't assume I'd tailor the counter to their level, but play the world as it is. They experimented with spells and felt out the situation and bailed when it became obvious they were outgunned. They got to use actual strategy and tactics. They made wise decisions in the face of insane odds. Is this even possible in your game? Can your players actually use strategy, or are you queuing up a buffet of easy for them? Engage your players and put them to work. Don't present the game as a series of boring fights they are destined to win. Present the world as it is and let your players decide how to handle it. Now, I'm sure it'll be interesting. There's a bunch of comments in here, and I think there's going to be a lot of interesting takes, right? Uh, because this person's not only stating, "Hey, what worked for them," but kind of doing it in an opinionated way, somewhat suggesting that this is how you should play. Now, look, this is how I play. This is, I think, my preferred style when it comes to games. However, I think that this is this person's experience at their table. And I could see at a lot of tables when not given the heads up that this is how we're playing, party's going to get in there, get decimated, and then be frustrated that you see all these posts all the time. I can't believe the GM threw all this stuff. I can't believe they gave us a super deadly. I looked up the CR of Flame Lizards and it's a crazy high CR and we couldn't handle it, right? All this kind of stuff. So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily a given that's like this particular person seems to be inferring that, oh, if you do this, your players are going to respond. This is what they really want. You just haven't given it to them, kind of thing. I think it's a style thing. I think it's something that while I enjoy it, and I think it's like I said, the way I like to play, I would never spring it. I didn't spring it on my table, just haha, here it is. I repeatedly hammered into them. This is how the game works. This is how the game works. This is how the game works. And then even when like the first time they would get in, I think probably even still, I would say, okay, remember, like you don't have to, like I think I will always remind them, remember, you don't have to stay, right? This fight, you don't have to just do it to do it, kind of thing. So it's something that I think is good, and I think it's good to be made aware of it. I like I said, I want to read some of these comments because I am sure that not everyone's going to love the responses is going to just be heaping laurels on old Z Moby. Mostly probably because of the way they said it, but we'll see. Krister says that they agree with this post. It goes well with the idea that in West March's campaigns where not all locations are intended for PCs at their current level. Krister also says, I've often made the mistake of having all combats be too easy. This teaches players over time that they can just charge in without thought or strategy and they'll still be fine. My bad. Ian says, and hey, Ian says, my party didn't run away and was largely devoured by giant lizards. Yes. The thing is you have to cover this stuff with your players. I do think that newer players are more elastic in their thought processes about how the game is. And I think that certain players may be more, just because of their attitudes, may be more likely to cut bait and run, which is kind of what this particular GM is saying. I think that, like for me, and this is just the way they said it, right? When he says quote, or they say quote, they learned very quickly that the CR was so much higher than anything. Like, I don't think in CR, and I hope that my players don't think like, oh my gosh, this thing has a high hit die. I hope they just think about it and go, oh my gosh, we're not, hitting it. And instead of doing kind of meta mental mathematics. And look, I'm great that this maybe worked for this player and this GM, and I'm happy for them. I'm curious here because remember, as like I said before, DM Academy mostly 5th edition, modern game focused, and that's just not how a lot of games are. And it's not anyone's fault. I think it's just a lot of factors that work together that I think is a struggle for everybody. I think for GMs, it's hard to figure out where their balance is, but if they don't want to do this and just have stuff that could potentially just be lethal, absolute lethal to their party, but they don't want everything to be a walkover. So that's when you end up in that hard balancing spot where do I put this encounter where it's challenging, but they can win. And then on the player side, I think a lot of players, they want that heroic experience of being challenged, but not actually losing. So, what do we do with that? It's a hard question for me. I just try to be really upfront and continual in my stressing of how my particular game table works and whatnot. Ian says they were brand new players. Well, that's the great thing about brand new players, right? They did something. The thing is I'm okay with that too. Hey, they went and they died. I was part of a game. Our first big encounter as a group, I was the only kind of veteran. And guess what happened at the end of that encounter? I was the only player character still left alive. And when those other new folks made their second characters, they played them a lot differently to the benefit of the game. They had to learn. They had to go through that and take that kind of punch in the mouth and say, "Oh my gosh, nothing is kind of given to us like that." But they knew they were going into an old school style game. That was kind of part of the pitch. Hey, this is different than you played before. This is lethal. This is all that stuff. So even though they didn't know it, in the sense of kind of knowing what they had to do, and they didn't listen to me when I was trying to tell them, "Hey, we probably don't want to do that." They learned, but it was kind of part of the experience. Whereas if they were playing fifth edition and we hadn't had talking to go over the stuff, how would they know? Especially when we as GMs don't know what, or just as a group, we don't know what all of our different table experiences have been. And Chrysler says, "Yeah, session 0, set expectations. You won't be able to kill everything you come across. This world is dangerous." Yep. And then Ian adds on, "The world is dangerous, sure, but novice adventurers are delving down into these ruins with some expectation of success. There wouldn't be world verisimilitude if folks were going down in these dungeons with the expectation these dungeons were certain death." Yes, Ian, that's true. But remember, let's say from an OSR perspective, again, fifth edition is going to be kind of different. From an OSR perspective, success in the dungeon doesn't mean defeating all the monsters. Success in the dungeon doesn't actually mean defeating any monsters. Success in the dungeon means finding some loot and getting out. And to be successful, you do not have to kill anything. To be successful, you certainly shouldn't try to kill everything because you limited resources and whatnot. So maybe for some tables, maybe your table, maybe not, you want to make sure that, hey, what the goal is, right? And that's another thing I hammered in my game, which is BX based, that listen, your experience is coming from loot and things like that. It is not coming from killing monsters. So you go out there and you go to kill stuff, that's fine. Maybe you will kill them, maybe you won't, but maybe a source of your personal enjoyment, and maybe a source of getting some learning experience, not experience points, but just learning experience of the game. But it's not really what success looks like necessarily. Success looks like finding stuff and escaping with that and your lives. And we could probably talk more about this because I think that's a big thing, that if you can turn people's looking at that, what does success mean? For a lot of people out of the box, it's killing monsters is my success. But when you can get that turned, no, accomplishing immediate, short-term, long-term goals is your success. And again, in a BX game, that might be your short-term goal in a given dungeon is get the loot. Then what it means to be successful, the things you have to do, all that stuff kind of shifts a little bit. And it's not about did we win this battle, or even should we win this battle, or really even should we fight this battle. Let's get back to see some of these comments. I feel like there's gonna be some great stuff. D. Ethan Bones says, "You quote, you need to escape, unquote, is infinitely better than a storyline scripted loss. But communication is important. Experienced players will calculate on their own when they need to run, but inexperienced players are what content should be written for. Clues are important. In game design, we don't make inside jokes that only we understand. We make obvious this wall is a secret door signs instead. Whenever players are assigned to run away, hints like environmental damage, incinerated treasure chests and doors, abrupt end to the civilized look of the area, and death remains. And then whatever NPC is with them goes into full-blown mortal terror with zero confidence in the adventure team." I do agree with that. I don't agree as a GM with that. I would never make an encounter that they're forced to run. I always think I just think that's a bad design. Forced to run away, that you'll see this setup where GMs will go, "Oh yeah, I want to make this encounter where the party has to run away." There's no has to run. To me, there's no has to run away. Maybe I would say the decision point whether you should engage or not is before you actually get into, say, combat range with the enemy. So it might be kind of too late, depending, right? But I would never make a thing like, "Oh, they have to run away or they have to lose," or anything like that. You never know what a player is going to pull out of their bag of tricks, or just luck, or depending on your system, just like kind of crazy. I have something that's always has you roll sixes and they're exploding sixes or exploding 20s to do some kind of crazy damage. And sure enough, you get that player on that one night that rolls, umpteen sixes or 20s or whatever in a row, just creating, just a crater, just blowing up the fabric of the space and time with the damage they're doing. You just let it roll. You go with it. So that was actually I was expecting. Well, I'm betting we're going to see some more comments, but that was a good one. And I agree with that one. Other than assigning, don't ever assign a condition that you absolutely need. If the party loses, they can always try to regroup and do it again. If they win, great. If they do something else, also great. Got a lot of responses to him. Let's get past his responses. Oh, there's the button to minimize that. Here's Niadnar17 says, from a player perspective, it's difficult, very difficult to know when to run in 5th edition. Kill a whole village of goblins 1 minute, get wrecked by 4 guards the next. It's hard. Oh, and I've lost video. All right, hold on a second. This seems like this just has to happen. Right? Once, I feel like now it's almost once every stream I've got to, there we go. I've got to do that. But I'm back. Okay. So Niadnar17 says, or just to follow up, he edited to add, I'm in the real world, I could tell at a glance what my chances are versus a random dog. In 5th edition, the rules for figuring this out are very difficult for everyone but a battle master. And then Manic Parrot adds, yeah, I signal it very clearly to players. Part of being competent and good at fighting is knowing your chances versus monsters. I'll tell them things like, as an experienced campaigner, your character knows that fighting a troll in the dark is a dangerous endeavor at the best of times, and after the last 3 fights without resources, you're in no shape to take this thing on. I don't necessarily go that far, though. I probably do sometimes. I probably do remember, hey, remember, I might say something like, how many spells do you have left? Or I do something differently. Like, how many resources do you have left? Seem like a good plan to do you got 1 torch left. Fight the troll. It seems like a good idea. Maybe not. Ian says I gotta turn it off on and off again. The thing is, Ian, with it's not actually my it's I don't know what it is. Either it's Windows messing around or it's the app, because it's not my actual device that turns off and on. I literally just have to change the inputs from, like, instead of webcam A, switch to webcam B and then back to webcam A. It's weird. I'm not sure. I don't know what it is. But it seems to happen more often than I like. Ian says it's like the MMO style game where you look at the enemy and their name is red, yellow, or green in relation to your level. Yeah, and I think MMOs, I think the reason why that it works in an MMO sense is because you have creatures, right? There's so many variations on a creature that may use the same or a very similar model, maybe with just a slightly different color, you might have wolves, and then you have gray wolves, and then you have dire wolves, then you have giant wolves, and they might be just slightly bigger than one another and different color, and you got all this stuff going on. I think part of it, right, is you're not looking at it. You're not in the game in first person view looking at it from a close perspective. You're pulled back. You've got an interface with all kinds of stuff going on. Could be potentially effects and everything's exploding. So it makes sense that, like, look, ultimately, while it may take us out of the fiction of being a farm boy that doesn't know anything about the world, because death generally has penalties and you might lose all your stuff and whatever, all this stuff going on, then hey, we want you to know. I think in a role-playing game, you can lean on several things. I wouldn't necessarily I've talked about having like dread as a thing, which I like, which gives you just a vague sense. It does not telling you necessarily exactly, but you get like, oh my gosh, this thing is, you're getting a bad, you're kind of getting a bad feeling about this, and then let the party kind of hang with that for a bit. So I do like that. I don't know if I would get as granular as, red, yellow, green, but I think the point is that you need to give out. That's where that just giving out a lot of context. You're approaching flame lizards. Yeah, they're in the throne room. They've probably been walking around. I mean, they had to get to the throne room from somewhere, so there should be burnt marks everywhere. Probably the outer walls of this thing are now warm. The door might be warm. The handle on the door might be hot. I really like the fact of having NPCs just express kind of the danger of the situation with their reactions. And so instead of just, in their case, the hireling got incinerated. That happened to him. But in another place, maybe the hireling does go running screaming, and that gives them pause. But certainly in 5th edition, where the expectation is, generally speaking, that, hey, you're in it to win it at all times, then if that's not how we're playing this game, then yes, you should tell them, reinforce it. And how you can reinforce it during the game is by making sure you're putting out a strong context of think twice. Ian says maybe the BX fighter should have a skill roll to determine hit dice. I would certainly, I don't know if I would necessarily give them hit dice and something that granular and specific, but I would certainly give them that kind of maybe roll, right? And have something, maybe even not even roll, just being able to kind of look and say, maybe they can watch it for a minute something they can kind of scope it. Like I'd want to give it maybe some kind of cost. Hey, if you can spend some amount of time, a minute or 10 minutes watching this creature, then you'll get a sense of what it is in relative to you. Like, oh, this thing is strong, it's a nasty customer, you think you can take it, or kind of thing. Maybe I'll give them that, like just a general thing to them. So I would probably use hit dice compared to level. So if you're level 3 and this thing's level 4 hit dice, I might say, yeah, I mean, it definitely looks as it looks dangerous in the same way that you are, right? Whereas higher, it's like maybe you get a bad feeling or something, right? I wouldn't want to get, I don't think I want to get like super specific and like it has 5 hit dice or anything like that, but certainly I could see saying, oh yeah, this looks tough or not so tough, or something of that nature. I definitely have to think about if I was going to technically do it. But I think as you get up in levels, you'll get enough. You'll get a little bit more of a buffer, and you'll get some tools to help you if you start something and then need to not finish it. Fighting withdrawals, close the door, drop some food, drop some loot. All those kind of escape mechanisms that you have. You can use to your example. The problem is that when you're first level, you have 3 hit points. That chances are 1 hit and you're toast. Krister says you could give them kind of higher, much higher, same as you, lower. Yeah, like I said, I would probably do something like that, but I would kind of stress some kind of vagueness. But yeah, I think something like, yeah, it's kind of about your level. It looks easy, or yeah, and I would that definitely seems to be a good thing to give to fighters. I could certainly be down with that. Gashrin says, from a GM perspective, it is difficult in 5e as well. I threw some encounters at my players which were supposed to be deadly by the GM guidelines, and they waltzed over them. And this is some kind of watermelon spritzer, swig of for the working man. Yeah, it's hard. 5th edition is hard because, I mean, look, I'm sure some games someone's going to say, oh, they did a perfect job of balancing them all out. Maybe. But I think in 5th edition or games similar where their powers, their abilities are all over the board, their items could be all over the board, and just the way GMs play, it's really hard to boil that down in some kind of statistic that's going to work for everybody. Especially if you might have some parties that are very efficiently, they're built by the real mathematician sort of power gamers that just have taken advantage of everything, make these really souped up characters versus inefficient ones, different subclasses, different makeups of parties, what kind of effects they have going on. If your party has a lot of effects where they can slow, stop, take away actions from singular creatures, this is the whole problem with singular creatures in general, that if the party gets to bring these abilities that take away actions to bear, you can just get in kind of a death spiral where your creature just doesn't really get a chance to act, and the party just gangs up on them, and just that action economy just spirals out of control. Ian says a 5e Battlemaster ability is literally spend a minute watching to determine higher or lower hit points or ability scores. That's cool. So yeah, Ian, I like it. I would just make it vaguer for my usage, at least in for my game. I would just make that more vague, but I do like it. A minute. The only reason I say 10 minutes is to fit it in that exploration turn, right? Because if you have combat 60 or whatever 10-second rounds, then I go to the turn. But yeah, a minute is good. 10 minutes is a long time to be able to watch something, but maybe not. I don't know. I suppose it really puts emphasis on being able to kind of set up, I don't want to say an ambush spot, or some kind of be able to really scout them out. Because you think about it, if you're really trying to figure something out, 10 minutes is not an objectionable amount of time to get some good information out. But it's a long time in terms of potentially sitting there in game. In the wilderness, maybe not so much, but definitely if you're in a dungeon, hanging out in a hallway for 10 minutes to try to eyeball the guards from around the corner, might be much, but it's only, I guess, potentially just one wandering monster check, depending on how you do them. Okay, and then let's see. So responding to Manic Parrot, Jay Benkin says, I usually have them make an insight check when I know they're in over their heads. And then Brandon Cole says, but why gate it behind a check at all? unless you want there to be a chance of failure. Unless the point of the encounter is that they're fighting a secret kung fu master and not an old man, there's no point to me in keeping the difficulty level behind the screen. And then Educational Bag 398 says, I do that too, but it's a super low DC, 5 or less, but they never fail it. It's just so you can always go up, add more. Maybe they notice a side exit in addition to knowing the retreat. They see a trap you could trigger. They know the guards move to exit instead of players, and they need to find another way out. I know it's not always the maybe correct check, but it keeps the game flow and allows some fun extra interactions. I'm not sure why. I mean, I don't. It seems like another thing. Like, why are you? Unless things are hidden, I'm not sure why I would roll to see that there's. I mean, the trap maybe side exit. I mean, I would just give that to them. I'm not sure. Just let's see. I don't want to get too sidetracked on this one topic. Let's see one more. Christina Cassidy says, my players decided to fight a giant scorpion in a room they could have immediately left despite being all below 10 hit points and completely out of every one of their abilities and healing potions. One player even moved further into the room to distract it while she had 3 hit points. So no, they don't seem to be capable of strategy. Oh, that's a good one. And then Ender or End3R97 says, if there's only one and they've got decent armor, then they might be able to survive. Good strategy would say they need to block the path. So one person has to be the target. Then that person needs a good armor class. Then they need to dodge in the doorway. Let's see. And there I'm skipping over the mathy mechanics here, but since one hit would put them down, it's probably not good enough. Ideally, they have, okay, that's more armor class. Based on your description, though, this is not what they did. Somehow I expect that they have like 14 armor class and attacked it. And Stoney says, or close the door. Yes. And then I just like this example, so I'll just do this one. Christina Cassidy responds, you were right on the money. The one who stayed in the doorway attacking was 16 armor class, and the one with 3 hit points had a 14. I have no idea why the goblin who can disengage as a bonus action stood in the doorway like that, or why the other player chose to run in. I put multiple corpses with mangled magic armor and broken magic weapons around to communicate the strength of this monster, and it did an insane amount of damage in one round and grappled an NPC with the claw attack thing and somehow missed 3 HP, thought this was clearly something to fight. Yes. So I think that, I mean, you know, who knows? We don't know anything about Christina Cassidy's game or anything, but I do think that the fact that so many of these players kind of come in with a certain expectation that, yeah, they feel like, oh, there's a giant scorpion here. Well, it must be a challenge relative to our resources. So sure, we're down, right? But, oh, the GM wouldn't put something that would just kill us, right? Knowing the GM knows we're down. So clearly this must be of our level, right? That this is like this thing that's placed here for us at this time, with, you know, in this context by the GM. So we must be okay to fight it, as opposed to, I didn't do any of that sort. This is where this thing lives, and deal with it or not. Brian Smith says, sometimes plans just don't work out. And then asks, is the GM assuming their players know their character abilities better than they actually do? I mean, maybe, Brian Smith, but I don't know. If you know you got 3 hit points, and you know that in, say, 5th edition, weapons tend to do more than 3 hit points of damage, and that's just not including giant scorpion monsters with claw attacks. So do you really need to know much about your character other than I've got 14 armor class, so I'm not that hard to hit, and I've only got 3 hit points, which means I can only get hit once, if that? So I don't know. I don't know. Oh, so Brian Smith adds, regarding the why didn't the goblin disengage, I hear that sometimes when a DM expects a player to play optimally in some way and they just don't, out of ignorance or just of their own free will. I see. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is you can't, this is why this is part of the whole issue with balancing, because if you're balancing an encounter, are we balancing it with the idea that they're playing optimally? And how could you balance it otherwise? Or do you balance it like they're using no powers, in which case, by default, they're going to be easier encounters, unless you then start jacking them up, which means, well, why did I use that for balance if I just have to change the numbers? But if I decide that they're all going to play optimally and then they don't, am I killing it? Like, it's just really hard. Like, I never assume my players are going to do anything that they have. Maybe they'll just all run up and hit. Maybe they'll all use special stuff they have. Maybe they'll use part and the other. But when you're trying to balance it, it's hard. Obviously, this thing was the guy saying, hey, don't balance it at all. But, I'm kind of impressed on these comments. I was expecting more of like, well, that's just your game, man. But it looks like a lot of good I mean, I do think that DM Academy is a pretty intelligent group overall. All right, I'm going to read this one. I didn't really go into, but this one seems like maybe it's a counter opinion finally. Ragara says there are ups and downs to this. If you've communicated to the players that this is a possibility and can happen, then they may not approach every combat as something to overcome, but rather sometimes something to escape from. This can create lots of drama and instill the idea that there are very powerful beings in the world that should not be messed with. But at the same time, players show up to the game because they want to be heroes and overcome the impossible. They want to use their tactics to win, despite the incredible odds, not to run away. Obviously, I shouldn't assume anything from a text post, but just in case you present the quote-unquote retreat scenario as virtuous. It is not. It is an option that must be thought out carefully to be used effectively. I'm not sure what he means by virtuous. I don't think anyone was saying that it's, I mean, I guess he means virtuous in the best, as it is the best answer, not virtuous as it is in somehow inherently better or inherently good. I mean, look, you got a good point. I think that yes, players want to be the heroes and they do want to overcome the impossible, but some things are too impossible to overcome at that moment. And heroes also go through all kinds of trials and tribulations to get to that point where they can do the impossible. They don't just necessarily wake out of bed, walk out in the world, and then take on the first impossible thing with this chance to succeed. So I guess we're looking at it from a narrative sort of journey, hero's journey type perspective, right? It's part of adventuring is you're going out to learn all the things that at the crescendo or the climax of the whole campaign, you're going on this minor stuff so that at that point you can then take on some kind of impossible task. Who Sunk Anaton, I think, responded. Heroic fantasy fiction is full of examples of the heroes running away to overcome the impossible some other day. Does understanding that your tier 1 party can't fight a Balrog make Legolas or Aragorn less heroic? I don't really personally get where this mindset that players want to fight everything they see and always win comes from. Maybe video games? Anyway, this is just a matter of talking to your players what kind of tone is desired from the game. And then Intrepid Progress 228 responds, says this is the issue with the 1,000,000-to-1 heroic trope in heroic fantasy. In books, movies, TV shows, and myths, heroes face the impossible odds and triumph. Without explicitly defining the tone of the campaign and hammering that home consistently, expect players in a heroic fantasy setting to default to that way of thinking, particularly as they level up. How do players expect to have that moment of triumph against long odds if the odds aren't in fact long? And if the odds are even or moderately in their favor, assuming encounters are appropriately balanced, then how to present the challenge as a real threat without each encounter turning into a Scooby-Doo episode? This requires good communication and buy-in from players, letting the players know what their chances are while giving them the option of role-playing their characters as terrified, resigned, determined, overconfident, clueless. It's a collaborative storytelling game, so collaborate. And then Who Sunk Anaton responds saying, what I don't understand here is that even in that fiction where the heroes beat the 1,000,000-to-1 odds, they don't win every encounter. A story that's just a sequence of the heroes winning with no setbacks isn't interesting. So where does the assumption that D&D works like that come from? Because it's not the books, movies, TV shows, and myths. Luke loses Obi-Wan in a hand to Vader and has to take downtime training. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas fail in protecting the hobbits and spend weeks tracking them. John McClane has to walk on glass shards to escape a firefight he couldn't win. Encountering setbacks and rising over them is at the core of heroic fantasy, as far as I understand. Even in Shunin manga, the hero doesn't always win right away. Having to go and do training to rise up to the level of the bad guy is a massive trope. But yeah, like you said, collaborate, agree on the tone, and stick to it. Yes, and so then Jin Potion says, other media controls what the setback is. Here, players are scared that failing means their character, who they like, care about, and want to continue playing, will die. Other media, but I think other media controls what the setback is. Players are scared that failing means that their characters will die. But I guess so. I guess maybe I'm not sure what he's trying to say there. And then someone says Drizzt ruins everything, which seems to be a lot of things people could say. All right, so enough with that one. I thought it was a good topic, but 36 minutes in, that's been my only topic. So some good discussion there on whether or not, or just the retreat issue in 5th edition. It's probably not singular to 5th edition. I'm sure it probably comes up in a lot of modern fantasy games. Let's see, looking for some good stuff. What to do with isolated ideas. That sounds good, but not for us. Oh, let's see. This is from AD&D, Discovering Curses. I don't know if it's a question, comment. Okay, it's a technical question, which I don't need to read. Fantasy rumors and plot hooks generators. Oh, come on. Well, you know I love a good generator. Here we go. All right. So this is, pick up another window. Put the link in here. We got ourselves a generator, ladies and gentlemen. This is the, what is this? Fantasy rumors, rumors, and plot hooks. We should be hitting the chat right there. I will show it on stream for a second. Bam. This is over at chaosgen.com/fantasy/hook. Bits of information of dubious quality from taverns, travelers, and other sources. Can I zoom in a bit more on this? Here we go. All right, so we've got okay, so that's we got some books. Yes, I see. Okay, so these are I guess kind of tabs or categories of generators. So we have any environments. We can pick our environment, and environments: city, rural, sea, or wilderness. Let's do what it says more. Okay. All right. So this was any environment. Might be nice if since they have environments that they put something, a little icon. I mean, I guess this first one because it says in the city, but it'd be nice to have an icon that's rural, city, blah blah blah, whatever. So I'll just read a couple of these. The Phantom of Darak the Burglar plagues an area at the city of Landpool, I guess in the city of Landpool, but nobody can put them to rest. So they say. Nobody can put them to rest. And you can see you can see kind of a few of the seams in the generator, but okay, cool. So we have a little rumor about a phantom burglar who is wandering around and nobody has found a way to send their spirit homeward. There is a tenacious swarm that appears at night in Frostbog. A tenacious swarm of what? Even if they don't know exactly, give me something. In a swarm of biting insects. There are whispering spirits hunting for something in Thazarday's ruins, a reliable source told me. An overgrown palace suffers from a powerful curse, but who cares? As a society of aristocrats wants someone to track down some adventurers, the Eldritch Fireballs. A vain artisan was accidentally killed by adventurers at a nearby dungeon. What the heck was the artisan doing running around a nearby dungeon? There is an elven ghost killing at random at the village of Halflington. That's scary. Finally, there's an ancient stone arch that is a place of magic. I mean, these are good. Look, it's free fantasy rumors and plot hooks. You could definitely. I think I would say this. They're not just a little bit more specific if I was just going to pull this in a game and run it. But if I was prepping for a game and I knew I had 10, 20 minutes, half an hour, and I knew I needed some rumors of stuff or I needed some inspiration, I could definitely see using this because then I can think about, because I just want that little bit, right? Oh, tenacious swarm. Swarm of what? I got to think about it. I think I want to say, even if the rumor doesn't spell out, it's a swarm of such and such beetle from page something such in the monster manual. No, okay. I don't expect that, but a little more detail, like they swarm of like lightning or I don't know, just something a little bit more. Same thing for the whispering spirits hunting for something. Yeah, maybe even another interesting name of something or other, like Thazarday's ruins. What Thazarday's tomb, the old home of Thazarday. Like the ruins is a little bit too vague. Like what ruined? What is ruined? Manor house is ruined castle. Like, what is it? So that kind of thing. So if I had 10, 20, 30 minutes, I could use these as a great first draft sketch, and then I could come in and fill it. But still, excellently done. There's a bunch of them, and I guess, and they've best Electrum seller. So look at that, all kinds of goodness over here, and they have a bunch of other generators too. So probably Chaos Gen might be a good site to bookmark. All right, Smith says, not Halflington. No. Yep. Halflington. Here's a rumor for you. A sage can tell of a magic item. Yeah. Maybe that would be, I might use that one as some kind of, maybe it's a, someone pretending to be a sage. They'll just say, like, give me 10 piece, 10 gold, and I'll tell you about a magic item. And then they just say, very basic, there are magic items out there everywhere. And then runs off. Some kind of goofy charlatan. So that was from chaosgen.com/fantasy/hook. Line and sinker. Let me give them a thumbs up. Well played, Duncan_chaos. Forbidden Lands with marches. Let's see. I might have to turn these to new, because I think you end up getting with these. I think with these multi-Reddits, one thing is, I think depending on, like, use them like hot, you can get weird results. I think at one point I was looking at posts from months ago. Need advice how to make human enemies. That seems really easy. I'm really curious. What is the Saturnalian 2089? Give them an upvote first of all. Did they have no other comments yet? Okay. Well, let's see. What are we in for? All right. So Saturnalian 2089 posted this to the DM Academy. How to make human enemies. So I'll go on this long rant to really explain what I mean. Too lazy, don't read. I have no clue how to truly create human enemies like guards, rogues, etc. that players could fight at any given level. Rulebooks don't provide the diversity I need sometimes. So here's my rant. I watch Critical Role. And yes, I know what you're thinking, but no, I'm not trying to be a quote-unquote mercer. And I see in Campaign 1, as they progress, Matt has enemies corresponding to their level so often, and now we're getting some Critical Role spoilers, Campaign 1, Episode 68, for some examples, so be aware of that. Kevdank's minions, the varying Goliaths, some are ranged, some are Stormblades or something like that, some are Druids, they provide a decent challenge. And later, where I am right now, they fight rogues, gunslingers / riflemen when they're facing off against Ripley in Glintshore. Enemies are always scaled at a level and provide the threat they are meant to. I have the Monster Manual, Volo's Guide, and Monsters of the Multiverse. Together, they provide a reasonable amount of options, but it's still not what I am looking for. I don't know if I'm just silly and can't figure out a simple solution, but I want to come up with enemies that are unique and fun to play as, for me, with some cool abilities like subclasses have, and also provide the appropriate threat level where needed. I know I could create a character sheet altogether to use as a potential, I hate the term, mob or boss, but is that the most effective way of creating humanoid enemies? Sorry for the ramble, just trying to explain it as much as possible for clarity. Appreciate any help, websites, tips, or just general advice. Okay, so Saturnalian 2089. Okay, so a lot of times, often in the monster manual, they give you one version of a monster. This is a cloud giant, and the cloud giant has a bunch of abilities or whatever. Okay, that's your basic cloud giant. What you can do is take that cloud giant and then, essentially photocopy them and then change out the stuff you want. So there's your basic cloud giant. Call them cloud giant adventurer. There's something that, for in cloud giant terms, they're the same as your adventurers, human adventurers. They're out there doing stuff out in the wild. Now we might have, well, who might guard the cloud giant city? It's probably maybe something with a bit more specialized training or abilities than the generic cloud giant. So then we can take that cloud giant, use it as a template, maybe flip along, look at some other monsters with some other abilities that we like. Think about how they might be reframed in the context of a cloud giant, add them in. We want to add more hit points, hit dice, whatever we do that. And then we can kind of guesstimate, really CR if that's important to you. And now we have, say, cloud giant guard that's got cloud giant sized heavier armor on, has some kind of massive spear, shield, and blade, and maybe some defensive abilities, some other stuff. As Brian Smith says in the chat, reskin. Right. Take that stuff, reskin it, add it to your thing, do that, and then you can just create different versions of them. Seems like, and I don't watch much Critical Role, but gunslingers / riflemen, right? He might be using the gunslinger class, or he just might have, as Brian Smith suggested, just reskin something and called it a gunslinger and just turned, if there was some creature that could shoot lightning from its antennae, you could just turn that into a person that's shooting lightning from some kind of specialized gun, whatever, right? You can take all these things that you want. But the thing is really ultimately that what you have to do, Saturnalian 2089, is you have to put in work. You have to put in work to make, you want to have a bunch of diverse creatures in an area, you got to work at it. You want to have, look, I have Kevdak, and I want to give him a bunch of minions of different types and different styles. You need to think about those. And I noticed that Saturnalian used the term mob, maybe, looking at MMOs or looking at fighting games or those kind of combat games. You look at different types of enemies. Oh, these should be what, I forget, the 4th edition was great with these, like the glass cannon type range ones. These are ones that are more sort of defensive, your frontline kind of defense types, such and so forth. You can break it out however you like, and then create those different units or different individuals, and then you can start mixing and matching those units in groups so that when your party encounters it, there's some defense people, some of those glass cannon types, they're tactically high precision, high damage kind of firing, some other types, and then you can start mixing, matching them together for your actual encounters. But you got to put in work. I mean, I don't think anyone suggests whether they love Matt Mercer or dislike him and the effect, whatever. I mean, the guy puts in, now of course it's a mainstay that they earn income, so it makes sense that they have the time and space to do that. But even before any of that, they just put in the work. You put in the work to come up with all these different unit types, and then you can mix and match them. The books generally just going to give you generic versions. Some of the books for different editions I know that had gone into, and 4th edition, something I think had a nice thing about their monsters where they have, here's goblins, here's a goblin skirmisher, here's a goblin archer, here's a goblin shaman, here's a goblin whatever. They kind of laid it out like that so you could have it. 5th edition, they didn't carry that forward, and of course they're not mixing and matching between different species and things. They're basically just giving you different types of goblins. So if you want to have truly varied creatures to suit, you got to go through some steps and create them. I mean, you can find them online, you can do a lot of stuff, but ultimately you'll get the closest to your vision if you actually do that work yourself. Hey, Red Caps, how's it going? Brian Smith says, like buying paint in primary colors and mixing your own colors. Don't buy each color as you need it. Yep, that's a good way to think of it. Andy Duvall says, Matt Colville has a cool monster customization method he outlines in action-oriented monsters. That's sort of OSR meets 4th edition. Yeah, I remember that. That was cool. I think that's a good way to look at customizing your monsters. The only thing I don't necessarily like about that, I'm torn, I guess. I appreciate what he's doing. I know people have used it. I've just never really liked it when we start building things out for rounds of combat or things. It gets to be kind of, I feel like it's a little too video gamey for me, I guess. And then I also wonder is if I'm playing it or if I'm running it, if I have like this goblin gets this ability in round 1, and then on round 2 he does this, and round 3, and then round 4, am I going to feel like I need to get the goblin around 4 so he can really unleash his cool ability? Or, like I just want I guess while I appreciate what he's doing, I don't know, something about it crosses a line for me, but it is definitely a good technique. And I think from a player perspective, the things that I'm focusing on, you're not going to notice, because unless you kill them in round 1, you're just playing and then stuff's happening. No one has responded in here yet, but hopefully they get some good advice. I mean, it's one of those things that, how do you make all these enemies different types? Is you got to kind of make them. And there's unfortunately, we're not at a point where we have everything that we need. Everyone has different needs and desires, and I think ultimately it'll become the most rewarding when you can figure out how to do this stuff yourself. It's very easy to always take someone else's work, but when you can figure out how to take those other people's work and then make it your own and then build from there, the amount of possibilities will be truly endless. Redcap says, using timers in the room so things happen on specific rounds, maybe not with a specific monster, but reinforcements, area effects is cool. Yes, I think having kind of time clocks in rooms like rising water or lava flows that are bursting, or you got the alarm has been rung and you have 3 minutes till reinforcements arrive, or 30 seconds or whatever. Yes, I think that stuff is cool. I just like it when like that stuff exists in the fiction, right? Because you can imagine a geyser, for example, that goes every 10 minutes. So that kind of fits. There's just something about it when I feel like it gets too much, like it becomes like that meta game. In what and like the goblin boss. I think like Colville's one of the examples is like the goblin boss that in round 2 says like, get over here, and then more goblins show up. Like, wouldn't you think they would do that in round 1? Like, why would you wait till round 2 or 3, whatever, to do the get over here? It's like, no, if I have 20 goblins in some kind of extra dimensional space, I'm dumping all 20 goblins in round 1. Initiative, what are you doing? Get over here. And 20 goblins drop in the room. Like, I'm not waiting 3 rounds, something like that. I'm sure there's some, look, this is me, right? This is me. I think a lot of people have used Colville's technique successfully. It's just call it a pet peeve, call it my own personal thing. Where are we at now in time? All right. Ooh, down to the wire. Let's see. Am I making a video game? All right. Ooh, this might be interesting. Everything's DM Academy today. Has anybody responded yet? Okay, so we'll see. This was posted by cheap_blood4735. Am I making a video game or a campaign? The title sort of speaks for itself, but I'll give you guys a little background. I am very new to DMing, having played D&D for about a year. The group I played with asked me if I would be willing to take up the role because their previous DM simply didn't have the time. I said yes and went straight to work looking into some of the pre-made campaigns online, none of which suited the theme I wanted to go for, so I decided to make my own from scratch. The 5 members of my group and me pitched in and purchased Foundry, Dungeon Draft, and Wonder Draft, as they look to be excellent pieces of software. They are. And I wanted the world to be as detailed as possible without having to be, quote unquote, lucky that somebody out there had made a map exactly to the specifications I needed. We are now heading into part 2 of the campaign, and I have sort of hit a wall. The world I created originally is a massive landmass that the group uncovered in part 1. So I was thinking it was in part I. I was trying to figure out what the I was about, but okay. Let me repeat. The world I created originally is a massive landmass that the group uncovered in part 1, and they are linking to the world map below. My question is, do you find it necessary to essentially create a map for every square of the world you're telling the story in? I always worry that my world will feel empty and boring if I don't, so I try to go for making battle maps for every region we're playing in. That's a lot of battle maps. Additionally, specifically for homebrew campaigns, what would you use to fill out a campaign to ensure they don't just steamroll through the hours you spent making maps and encounters? Do you as DMs find this to be necessary? And if not, how do you fill in the gaps between the objectives you set out for your groups? World, map, link. Too lazy, don't read. It feels like I'm making a video game rather than tabletop adventure, and I'm worried I bit off more than I could chew. Oh my gosh. I feel like there's so much to unpack. And I feel like this is someone who, I feel like, can I just pitch my channel to you, kind sir? Just go look at the 100 plus videos on hex crawling that I've done in terms of what is in between objectives: the wilderness, towns, cities, empires, kingdoms rising and falling. Andy Duvall says, I think that some of that is his way of managing the strict action comment. Oh, he's going back to the Colville. I thought this was talking about this guy. Going back to, so Andy Duvall, we're commenting back on the Colville thing, managing the action economy. Yes, I know. I agree. It's like I said, I don't think he's doing anything wrong, and it's a perfectly valid approach to doing it. And I appreciated a lot of what he did. There's just that thing where I kind of like it. I almost like those things better, where it's like, say in round 1, I can choose between a bunch of options, and then there's maybe a recharge. Like, even for the goblin calling, because I guess I'm wondering, like, could I make sense of it in a fictional way? Why does the guy not call the goblins every time? Because and just get as many goblins in here as possible for survivability purposes. Why wait for someone to potentially one-shot you or something before you can get reinforcements going, right? So that would be, whereas if it's a recharge, let's say, and I can choose in round 1, I only have a couple of actions, so I can only choose a couple things. I can either ring the bell, blow the horn, do the thing to get some goblins to come, or something else. If I need to reason as, well, why don't I do that every round? It's not something like a dragon's breath where it needs to kind of recharge in a way that kind of makes sense, like say a gland filling up with more dragon fire fuel. Then maybe I could say that there's nobody else. You got to wait for some other guys to get in range, or everybody who was available came in, and anybody else they weren't around then, and so you're just waiting, right? Something like that. Because remember, 6 seconds. If you call, there's nobody there. You might maybe you call again, maybe wait. I can at least think of an example why if I put like a recharge die on calling for reinforcements, it's not perfect, but I can kind of make it make sense. If it's just a meta thing of no, this is your round 2 ability, it's like why? Why would I do that? Red Cap says, I think getting back to the topic of making the campaign making, prep no more than 1 session ahead. Don't wait on cool ideas. Use them now, not later, and ask your players where they want to go next time so you can prep that. The world map is more for the GM than the players. I agree with all that. I'm kind of curious. I'd love to see his world map. What's he got going here? What do we have? This is in Wonder Draft. I like it. I don't know. We don't have a sense of the scale. It does have hexes in here. I think that, there's some information I would probably want to ask. Like, what does he mean by objectives? Talking like what's between the Coral Cave and Fort Hellreach? I mean, there's all this stuff. You got to pass through the whole Ash Wastes. I mean, I think it could be. So there's a couple of vectors for this, right? Are they, because I really don't doubt there's some folks who are kind of, they don't even have the concept of doing sort of the overland travel. They're literally just saying, oh, Hellreach, yeah, you trudge across the Ash Wastes for 5 days, end up at the shores of the lake, if that's even the stopping point, or because you're on an airship, like everybody else seems to be these days, you fly the airship all the way to the caves, and it's just like a journey, and then you start thinking, well, maybe I want to put an encounter there or something. Like that's how you build it out. I'm not sure if that's where they're coming from. If they are, then I would say, hey, embrace that getting, that what happened to the journey is half the fun. Embrace the troubles of getting there. Embrace characters, the party, not knowing exactly where this stuff is. Or maybe they're here and they don't know exactly where Fort Hellreach is. They only know that it's somewhere past on the other side of the Ash Wastes. And given how big these hexes probably are, there's a lot you could get to before you might stumble onto Fort Hellreach, especially if circumstances don't make, stuff like visibility or just where the mountains start, right? All this stuff is variable. So have fun with exploring those variables and not even put obstacles, it's opportunities. Just put things. Where are the Ash Wastes completely empty? Or maybe there are some folks or creatures or things that have made their living or work there, live there. What ruins might there be? Were the Ash Wastes always the Ash Wastes, or did something terrible happen? And if something terrible happened, what ruins and what remnants of that stuff? And give the party a chance to really explore it. Put it out in front of them. Don't just have an easy pathway that leads through. Make them wander around. Make them have to find the direction through. Make them have to just find a path through. The Ash Wastes are full of, I don't know, super hot ash dunes that are impossible to climb and rough mountains and other things. And you got to pick and find your way. And then could there be fun things in there when you start doing those things? Then you start adding in stuff like your wandering monsters and other things. You could really end up with some amazing situations and things for them to deal with. And it also makes your world feel bigger and large in a real way. Yeah, you could just say, oh, it took you a week, but it doesn't really feel much as a player playing through. Whereas if you actually have to spend a bunch of time moving through, that journey is going to feel more meaningful. The other parts, let's see, what were the other parts of the questions? Do I find it necessary? I don't know if it's strictly necessary. I think it is. If you want to make your world feel alive and diverse and large, I think some of it is necessary. I don't know how you get there without doing those things, but there might be ways. I definitely find that it adds to me, and it helps kind of in not only the sense of space, but also of time. If you're getting there and just blinks of an eye, you're not, the time investment isn't going to feel real. Whereas if you have to spend some of that time, even if it's just a little bit more narration, even if you don't roll any wandering monster checks and they do whatever, just that cadence of, I feel like you just get into that cadence of feeling like you're traveling, which helps just convey, putting them in the moment of, oh yeah, we're traveling. We're stepping across this world. And what might we find as we move? You definitely don't need battle maps for all these things. So I'm not sure if they're using battle map the way I am. I mean, goodness gracious. taking even a region. And this looks more like a region than a whole world map, but then battle mapping everything. Goodness, no. Red Cap says it's necessary, but not until they're actually going that direction. Excuse me. Spending the time developing it a year ahead of time isn't the likely best use of energy. No, that's true. I mean, I'm going to be sensitive to the fact that some folks can't just not. I mean, yes, if you're going to be the most efficient use of time is just like what Red Cap said earlier, just plan what's around you. Don't plan more than a session ahead. And, there is going to be some variability in how much is a session ahead, right? How much do I need to do to get ahead of a session? There's no one answer for that. It's going to be your table, your pace. A lot of stuff's going to enter into it, but you will get into a good groove. You'll settle in and you'll kind of get a good understanding of how much your group gets through in a session, and then you'll kind of find that sweet spot. And sometimes you might be surprised one way or the other, but generally speaking, you'll end up kind of on the money. I think it can. I do think there is some value in at least doing some general planning, because you may want to introduce elements. You want to show some of that, people traveling, this or that, and sometimes if you just start small and you have no idea what's going on in a kind of a wider world, then it feels like you're in this tiny little glass jar, like you're in a terrarium. So, being able to have somebody come from the South and then somebody asks, oh, where in the South are you from? And then you get, instead of going like, because you didn't fill out the South, having some idea of what's there, I think isn't a bad idea. But when it comes to doing like in depth, then there's no point in planning more than just top level, really surface, really high, right? High abstract. Okay, there's the Republic of Tar, and they're this, and they do a couple things and whatever, and that's it. I'm not going to do more than that. And you can just do that in a couple minutes, and don't spend a ton of time on it. But I also respect the fact that people are going to spend a ton of time on it, because I think it can hit people in their kind of OCD, just need to just fill everything in, and plus it is an enjoyable exercise. Right. Res Redcap says, I mean, if it's fun for you, then yeah, go nuts, but don't stress and tire yourself out with it. That's part of it. Yes. I mean, right. That's what I think I would like to tell folks like that. I don't think they always hear it, and I get it. We all have our things that we like, and some people just really do just get neck deep into world building, or knee deep, head deep, neck deep. Is that what did I mean? Up to their eyes in world building. Just one thing to keep in mind, I think, is a great rule of thumb. Whatever world building you've done, if you've done a paragraph or a 100-page book, nothing is official, nothing really real until it comes out at the table. So, because of what I've seen far too often is people writing themselves in the world building into corners and then refusing to get out. The players don't know anything. It hasn't come out in the game yet, but they're stuck on this idea and they simply won't change it because they wrote it down. Especially if you're doing this in using digital devices, there's always an eraser. There's always scissors to cut out something, or white out, or just scratching it out with a pen. Never just stick to your world building above what's going to make sense in your game just because you wrote it down. Always be ready to take the eraser to it, edit, change it, delete it if need be. Redcap says, the people of the South love pig tongue pie, but only on the third moon of the season. That's what I need a generator for, Redcaps. Weird quirks and things like that for countries far away, for cultures far away. That's actually that would be a really good generator. Give me a random kind of culture thing that just gives me some factoids, maybe a word they like, a common name, something they like, something they dislike, maybe a basic thing about their environment, or what kind of biomes they inhabit, if they only have it one or multiple, whatever. Like, that would be great, because that would be awesome to have when, I want to, maybe I'm at a town that's like, this town is at the crossroads, and then the party actually takes that to heart and starts looking for travelers, and suddenly I need people from further away than the one hexes around that I've created. Then having some kind of generator I could go to and say, oh, this guy's from down here, and then I can write it down and use later. Very useful. All right, folks. Well, that hour just blew on by. I'm just going to see if anybody gives this guy some advice, or person, I shouldn't say guy. Oh, they did. Penguin D&D says, this is the slippery slope of VTTs. On the one hand, they can provide beautiful, detailed maps of your world. On the other hand, you now have to make scour and steal those maps. I would pull back on the use of maps if it feels too restrictive to you. Embrace the theater of the mind opportunities when they present themselves. That's nothing wrong with that. Gravion Bell says, first off, your map is sick. Fort Hellreach, hell yeah. Second, your players only encounter what they encounter. You do not need to have everything possible ready for them, as that way lies madness. It's great that you have the world set up, but turn to it when it enables you, not when it burdens you. Ah, that's a nice turn of phrase. If it's fun to you to have a couple of battle maps available for each region, go for it, but mostly keep them generic enough that you can drop them anywhere. The idea is that if they go off somewhere and you're not sure what's there, you can decide in the moment and still be able to use the now quote-unquote off-the-shelf resources you've created. I don't do anything on this scale, but admittedly, I run in person. We use a flip mat, markers, and whatever minis we've got on hand. My view is that online tools are amazing, but you should not feel required to use every facet of them every time. Seems like you're running a great game for your players, and they're never going to think it's empty or boring. Also, good points. And then finally, Broken Hugs. Have a hug, Broken Hug. Says, here's a hint. Even if you do find it necessary to create a map for every square of the world, you define what a square is. As the DM, time and space are at your command. You can use a zoomed out hex map for overland travel and maybe swap to a generic outdoors map when there's an encounter, a slightly zoomed in town map for each settlement of interest, and reserve the high zoom 5-foot squares for actual dungeons. You can determine what is chaff and what is wheat and separate them as you see fit. So all good advice. Well, folks, we didn't get through a bunch, but I thought we got through some good stuff. Always interesting, always exciting. It's that time to say goodbye, but only until the next stream. If you haven't given a thumbs up yet, if you could on your way out, that would be awesome. If you found you got dropped in here and you're not subscribed and this sounds like something that you think, hey, I like this stuff, if you want to go ahead and subscribe, that would help me out a lot. The algorithms and all that stuff. Other than that, just have a great rest of your day. Be well, play well, game on, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.